So what is queer theory? The shortest way to put it is that queer theory is a war against the normal. I could say it's just queer Marxism. Ta-da, we're done. Because queer means abnormal, right? And so some people have access to a special kind of bourgeois property called normalcy, and other people do not. They're excluded from that by the system of considering some things normal and considering other things abnormal. So what you have to do is you have to get the people who are considered abnormal to awaken to a consciousness of their abnormality and the injustice of being classified as abnormal by a society that favors normalcy and wage war on the very concept of the normal and undermine it. It's queer Marxism.
And that is the world we're living in. We're living in the world where the woke left are waging a war on the normal, to undermine what's normal and to eventually overthrow what's normal and replace it with the abnormal. I mean, these Calvin Klein billboards stretching across just over 2 decades is a perfect representation of this. That they are taking everything that has been perceived as normal by society, for whatever reason that may be, and flipping the cultural board over, as it were, to force society to view the abnormal as not only legitimate and equal to what is viewed as normal, but in some cases to be viewed as superior to what is seen as normal. And this is primarily happening through queer theory, or queer Marxism as James puts it. Many refer to this state of affairs we now find ourselves in as clown world, because of the absurd nature of it all. I would more accurately describe it as upside down world, because that accurately describes everything that is happening. No matter what the situation is, be it in politics or culture, whatever the normal sane take on any situation, what would have been seen as the completely normal and rational understanding of that situation 10 years ago, the woke left now will hold the complete opposite, no matter what it is. I mean, once upon a time, our society pushed say no to drugs, as most of us viewed drugs as a bad thing, and addicts were in need of help to get off drugs. Yet what do Democrats and the woke left now promote? That doing drugs is fine as long as you're doing it responsibly in safe drug sites. The Biden administration was sending out crack pipes with so-called safe smoking kits, for goodness sakes. No matter what the fact checkers may claim. I mean, you even have signs like this now in major Democrat-controlled cities saying, "Don't be ashamed you are using, be empowered that you are using safely." So this is a complete inversion of how drug use was once viewed. What was seen as the normal position on such a topic has now been upended and replaced with an abnormal position. So it doesn't matter how insane, how unhinged, or how completely outside of reality these abnormal positions are, the woke left will defend them and hold on to them like their life depended on it. And any attempt to explain why they're wrong or abnormal will be met with the usual array of insults ending with the assertion that you're against progress. But just as James Lindsay said, this is an attack on the very concept of normalcy, on who gets to decide what is normal, and that by labeling things as abnormal, we're excluding those things from society, and that is therefore oppressive. So the abnormal must be liberated from that oppressive system. It's the very same narrative the woke Marxist left used for everything. Another example of this attack on what is normal can be seen in the realm of fat studies and the fact acceptance movement, to where through study, science, and just the reality of observation, we can point to what is considered a normal body weight for generally most people. And this normal body weight is considered to be a healthy body weight. And anything outside of this, be it too skinny or more likely in the context of the Western world, being too fat, are considered unhealthy and therefore abnormal. Yet what is the woke left narrative now? That being fat, overweight, and even obese is in fact normal, with magazines proclaiming it to be perfectly healthy to be large and overweight, promoting large obese women in order to normalize the body type, with women coming out and saying it's time to break out of what is considered acceptable and embrace their fatness, because they want to diversify society's belief about the acceptable body. In other words, they want to take what is considered abnormal and push it as a means to fight back against what is considered normal, to resist what is normal, because normal is seen as an oppressive force. That's why the article says breaking out of the acceptable. And while this is all under the umbrella of fat studies, it still falls within the realm of what queer theory, by their own woke description, is meant to do. Because while James Lindsay said that queer means abnormal, he's actually underselling what it means. It doesn't just mean abnormal. It means an active resistance to regimes of the normal. So whether it's fat studies, critical race theory, or queer theory, all of wokeism is about resisting regimes of the norm. That is why so much of the queer narrative is framed as queer resistance. Over and over again, it's queer resistance, queer resistance, queer resistance, queer resistance. Because that's what queer is. It's pushing back against what is viewed as normal. And so, naturally, what comes after resistance is, of course, queer liberation, which is finally achieved when what was as seen as abnormal is now the new normal, with all the power and privilege that the old normal had. And so, what is more abnormal in our society right now than the entire gender identity movement and the absurd belief that a person can change their gender, that you can be trans? But sadly, that's where we're at right now in this upside-down world we all live in. The very concept of what a man and woman is, the very concept of biological sex, have all been turned on its head, to the point where the woke left not only believe you can change gender, but that biological sex is not real.
Basically, it's not correct that there is such a thing as biological sex. And I'm a historian of medicine. I can unpack that for you at great length if you want, but in the interest of time, I won't. So that's a very popular misconception.
And just in case this random individual statement isn't enough, here's an article from Forbes titled, "The Myth of Biological Sex," where the article goes on to say, many who oppose transgender rights believe that gender is determined solely by biological sex. But biological sex isn't as straightforward as they likely think, and there is no one parameter that makes a person biologically male or female. In fact, many conditions make assigning a biological sex quite difficult. Despite the complexities, biological sex is often discussed as if it were obvious how to assign male or female sex. It's just unreal that we now live in a world where people actually believe that it's not obvious how to assign male or female sex. As in, your genitals do not define whether you are male or female anymore as far as the woke left is concerned. As you can see from this article from Nature.com, saying that the proposal to establish a legal definition on whether someone is male or female based on the genitals they are born with has no foundation in science and should be abandoned. That's where we're at in society now. And this is being taught to children in schools. That when doctors look at you and say if you're a boy or a girl, doctors are actually just taking a guess.
This is how I explain what being transgender means to kids. When a baby is born, the doctor looks at the baby and says, "Oh, this is a little girl," or "Oh, this is a little boy." And sometimes the doctor gets that wrong. So when I was born, the doctor looked at me and said, "This is a little girl." And so everybody thought that I was a little girl. But when I got older, I realized, wait, that's not actually who I am. And when I was able to tell people, I said, "I'm not a little girl, I'm a little boy." And that just means that I am transgender. that who everybody said that I was isn't actually who I am, and I just had to explain that to people.
So something that's really cool and unique about who I am is that I am transgender. So we touched a little bit about that at the beginning of this week in the book that Miss Hammond read, but I'm going to give you my explanation about what it means to be transgender as well. So when babies are born, the doctor looks at them and they make a guess about whether the baby is a boy or a girl based on what they look like. And most of the time that guess is 100% correct. There are no issues whatsoever. But sometimes the doctor is wrong. The doctor makes an incorrect guess. When the doctor makes a correct guess, that's when a person is called cisgender. When a doctor's guess is wrong, that's when they are transgender.
So this is the narrative they're spreading, that biological sex isn't real. It isn't a defining factor into whether a person is a boy or a girl. That doctors are really just taking a guess. And that sometimes they get it wrong. And since babies aren't able to communicate, because they're literal infants, they can't tell the doctor they're wrong. As this children's book puts it, see, when you were born, you couldn't tell people who you were or how you felt. They looked at you and made a guess. Maybe they got it right, maybe they got it wrong. So this is where the woke left stand on the issue of biological sex and the concepts of being a man or woman. That you basically get to choose. That biological reality has nothing to do with it. And this is the narrative that all of our cultural and political institutions are adopting. The total upending of what our society and every other society has viewed as completely normal. That you are born a male or female by virtue of biological observable reality, as in your genitals. And so, while now male or female are interchangeable based on what you identify as, having nothing to do with how you're born, the woke left will still say you're born a certain way. That there's still a biological component. It's just what the woke left now says you're born with was once viewed as a choice. Does anyone remember the phrase sexual preference? Of course you do. Because just a decade ago, to use such a phrase was perfectly acceptable. Because the general belief was that you could change your preference on sexual matters. Gay, straight, bi, what have you. But now this phrase has been deemed offensive, seemingly overnight during the confirmation hearings of Amy Coney Barrett. Democrat Senator Mazie Hirono called out Barrett for using that phrase, calling it offensive.
This morning, Senator Feinstein asked you a question about the Supreme Court's 2015 decision in Obergefell v. Hodges, a case in which the court recognized the constitutional right to same-sex marriage. And I was disappointed that you wouldn't give a direct answer on whether you agreed with the majority in that case, or if you instead agree with your mentor, Justice Scalia, that no such right exists in the Constitution. So even though you didn't give a direct answer, I think your response did speak volumes. Not once, but twice. You used the term sexual preference to describe those in the LGBTQ community. And let me make clear, sexual preference is an offensive and outdated term. It is used by anti-LGBTQ activists to suggest that sexual orientation is a choice. It is not. Sexual orientation is a key part of a person's identity. That sexual orientation is both a normal expression of human sexuality and immutable.
Then, within less than 24 hours, Merriam-Webster changed the definition of preference, which had orientation listed as basically a synonym for preference, to qualifying that the label was now offensive. Further, changing the actual definition of sexual preference to be listed as offensive as well, stating that the term sexual preference, as used to refer to sexual orientation, is widely considered offensive in its implied suggestion that a person can choose who they are sexually or romantically attracted to. So, no longer is who you're sexually or romantically attracted to considered a choice. It's now considered a sexual identity that, get this, you're born with, as in is biologically determined. as Senator Hirono said, it's immutable. So biology no longer determines if you're a man or a woman. Rather, biology determines who you are going to be sexually or romantically attracted to. So stop calling it a choice, bigot. Biological factors determine every sexual orientation, up to and including, yes, even pedophilia.
In terms of queer theorists more specifically, because I know you've talked about how they want to keep their quote unquote revolutionary energy going. They don't want society to stabilize. And so they focus on the smallest minority in society to try and keep them angry and unsettled. So in the context of pedophilia, so I've done brain imaging in the past on pedophilia. The lab I worked in, we had a $1.2 million grant from the Canadian government to do our research. I was doing brain imaging research. And as far as we know from the research, which is, I would say, not marred by activism yet, because I know the people who are doing this work, pedophilia is biological. So it's something that cannot be changed. It can't be cured. And I think that does have implications for how we treat it and also how we prevent sexual abuse of kids.
So science now says that pedophilia is biological. But science now also says that male and female are not biological. And that according to the woke left, there is no obvious way to determine biological sex. This is the upside-down world we now live in. This is the world the woke hath made. This is the complete overturning of everything that was considered scientific and normal within the world of sex and gender. This is what queer theory is designed to do. And this overturning of normalcy within sex and gender also has a massive effect on something else that has always been seen as completely normal and healthy for society. That of a normal nuclear family structure. That of a man and woman, married, raising their children together. Yet overturning this completely normal and natural family structure is what the woke Marxist left seek to do. With Black Lives Matter having owned their website, under the Black Village section, explicitly stating they are committed to disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. With even schools taking these ideas and promoting them. You even have CNN articles saying the Western concept of family needs to move with the times. And what do they mean by move with the times? They mean resisting the established structure of what is deemed as normal and begin promoting the abnormal, which is found in the queer family. Because we can't just have heterosexual families anymore. That's oppressive, because it excludes other types of families from what is deemed as normal. Families that have nothing to do with the rearing of children, but rather the sexual gratification of the people involved. Yet, even when a child is involved, you end up having abnormal situations where a woman who thinks she's a man and a man who thinks he's a woman having a child together, where the man tries to breastfeed the baby. And this gets promoted as being perfectly natural.
Are we not assigning a sex to the baby? DC is forcing me to label myself as the mother, and that's not the case. Patrona is the mother.
This whole birth certificate thing is really causing me a lot of hurt. Trans women can be mothers.
Oh, I put it over here.
Has been able to latch, but I've not been able to produce any milk.
'Cause you're a dude!
Because we're gonna supplement the feeding with formula so that my baby's still getting the nutrients that they need.
This is an absolute abomination of everything that has been known as a normal family structure. This is the queer ideology's utter corruption of the traditional nuclear family. And whether people want to admit it or not, this corrupting of the nuclear family structure began with the normalization of gay marriage and the idea that 2 men or 2 women in the home constitutes a family. Because in order to have gay marriage, the left had to redefine what a marriage even was, with marriage always being seen as a union between a man and a woman in order to create a family unit for the purposes of rearing children. Yet when they redefined the term to include same-sex couples, It shattered the entire purpose of what marriage as an institution was meant to do.
Mr. Keyes, on the Channel 7 debate last Thursday night, you said, and I'm quoting you, where procreation is in principle impossible, marriage is irrelevant. You went on to say it was irrelevant and not needed. What about marriage between people who are well beyond their childbearing age? Irrelevant, not needed?
No, it's simply a misunderstanding. The word in principle means relating to the definition of, not relating to particular circumstances. So if an apple has a worm in it, the worm is not part of the definition of the apple. It doesn't change what the apple is in principle. So the fact...
It retains its appleness.
It retains... It retains... To act as if concepts are laughable means that you want to be irrational. Human beings reason...
You said it was irrelevant and not needed.
Human beings reason by means of concepts and definition. We also make laws by means of definitions. And if you don't know how to operate with respect for those definitions, you can't make the law. An individual who is impotent or another who is infertile does not change the definition of marriage in principle. Because between a man and a woman, in principle, procreation is always possible. And it is that possibility which gave rise to the institution of marriage in the first place. As a matter of law,
it's still
as a matter of law
possible
and
in
government.
principle.
But when it is impossible, as between two males or two females, you're talking about something that's not just incidentally impossible, it's impossible in principle. And that means that if you say that that's a marriage, you are saying marriage can be understood in principle apart from procreation. You have changed its definition in such a way as, in fact, to destroy the necessity for the institution. Since the only reason it has existed in human societies and civilizations was to regulate, from a social point of view, the obligations and responsibilities attendant upon procreation. So when you start playing games in this way, you are actually acting as if the institution has no basis independent of your own arbitrary whim.
One of the most recent examples of what gay marriage has done to the institution of marriage and the family unit as a whole has been the situation with Dave Rubin and his partner. With them announcing they were having kids while showing 2 pictures of babies growing in the womb. And of course, everyone's first thought when seeing this was, wait a minute, these are 2 gay men. They're not having sex with women. Who and where are these women that are having these babies for these homosexual men? And that's exactly it. 2 men who are, quote-unquote, married, that cannot procreate, have hired 2 women to be surrogate mothers for them, who will give birth to these children and proceed to give them over to 2 gay men to raise, with who knows if the mothers of these children will ever have any part in their lives. The entire situation is just as unnatural and grotesque as the transgender family. I mean, as screwed up as that transgender family situation is, at the very least it was still a biological man and woman together. I mean, in no way will that situation be good for the child, mind you, but they were at least conceived between 2 consenting adults. What Dave Rubin and his partner are doing is just obscene, unnatural, and of course completely abnormal. I mean, they couldn't have just tried to do an adoption? I would have been opposed to that as well, but at least that would have been somewhat the normal thing to do. Even still, the belief that 2 men or 2 women together with kids in the home equals a family is just as abnormal as anything else. Yet it's been so normalized and pandered to by even some on the right, it just appears normal to most of society now. Yet it was just as much a step in the overturning of the normal family structure as the march of the queer family is now. So if the family structure has been totally corrupted, what's meant to be family-friendly gets corrupted right along with it. With the woke left being obsessed with pushing sex and sexual themes as a family-friendly activity.
Hello, my name is Ailey. I'm Programming and Engagement Manager at Tobacco Factory Theatres. I am a white female with brown blonde hair and my pronouns are she, her. Family Sex Show is a fun and playful show for adults and children aged 5 and up. It offers an honest human sex education that is feminist, queer, non-binary, inclusive and sex positive. This show can allow audiences of all ages to feel confident about their bodies, their boundaries and their sexual health, and we really hope to see you here.
a woman.
All of these were advertised as family-friendly events. Yet by every sane moral standard from 10, 15 years ago, these would have not only been considered completely inappropriate as a family event, they would have been considered perverted and possibly criminal should any parent have been found taking their children to such events. Yet now we find ourselves in a world where these things are openly promoted, with parents bringing their children to them. And companies, politicians, elites, and the woke Marxist left all applaud it as a great progressive leap forward in tolerance and understanding. This is the war on the normal. This is the complete overturning of every moral, sane, rational status quo that has upheld our world, and is being brought about by queer theory. And if it continues, everything that was once seen as normal and good will become the abnormal. We'll be completely living in the upside down. And there'll be no way out. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. You can find me on most social media sites talking about culture and politics. So do look me up and say hello. And take care, and God bless.